Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the season of holidays. 'Tis the season, as they say, to wish happy holidays to all those we know, or even pass on the street or stand behind in the supermarket checkout lines. Hanukkah, Christmas, New Year, Sylvester, Novi God, Nowruz, Kwanzaa, it's all there. So happy holidays is a catch-all greeting for all of them. It's one size fits all, and it works for all of them. Jews have assimilated, that's a fact, not an opinion. And for many Jews world over, even perhaps especially Jews in the Jewish state, some of these holidays raise serious questions. The cultures of the non-Jewish world have encroached and influenced our Jewish communities, including Israel. Anyone who has any understanding of Jews in the diaspora knows that many Jews have Christmas trees in their homes, certainly in their places of business. Many of them couch those trees and call them Hanukkah bushes. They're trees, but no matter when Hanukkah falls, the trees are bought, decorated, and enjoyed at Christmas time. When Hanukkah falls out at Thanksgiving time, as it did this year, there were no Hanukkah bushes. Now there are. Many of these families celebrate both Hanukkah and Christmas. Almost none of them celebrate Purim. The discomfort of some Christmas-embracing Jews around traditional Jews is often palpable. The guilt on the face of a Jew who had just bought a family tree and was, along with his wife, walking along Broadway and schlepping it home is unlike any emotion I have ever experienced. His Shabbat Shalom to me was whispered and hurried, almost inaudible, but there. Each year, each generation, more and more Jews are taking on, dare I say, embracing these foreign traditions. It is impossible to fight assimilation except by isolation. January 1st, the New Year, the secular New Year, is the perfect example. That's when it really hits home. Many places throughout the world call it New Year. They call it Sylvester. That's the term used in Hebrew, Sylvester. It's the name given to January 1st in Israel. Obviously, it cannot be called Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the first and second day of Tishrei. Once you know the history behind Sylvester, you will probably never call it that again. You may even opt out of celebrating or commemorating the day entirely. Sylvester was a pope. He served from 313 to 345, and according to legend, Pope Sylvester was responsible for converting Emperor Constantine to Christianity. In other words, because of Pope Sylvester, the Roman Empire turned Christian. Until then, the Roman Empire was polytheistic, and Romans worshipped multiple deities. The ripple effect of that conversion has been gargantuan and has reverberated throughout the next 1700 years, all because of Pope Sylvester. He was, of course, sainted. The anniversary of Sylvester's death is December 31st. It was turned into a holiday replete with feasting and celebration. Pope Sylvester was a notorious Jew hater. Jews from the former Soviet states celebrate neither New Year nor Sylvester. They celebrate Novi God, New Year in Russian. Novi God was the only non-communist holiday in the communist calendar. The Russian president would speak, the Kremlin clock would strike 12 midnight, and celebrations would commence. It was a celebration of winter. The idea of Jews celebrating winter in Israel, just like celebrating Christmas anywhere, is a bit out of sync. In 2004, a bill was actually proposed before the Knesset to outlaw these non-Jewish traditions. The bill failed. This influence of outside culture is not unique to Jews. Judaism and Israel are not alone when it comes to the quandary wrought by the influence of outside culture in insular societies and religions. The Iranians, world over, celebrate a Persian New Year. It's called Nowruz. And it's official that it's an actual holiday in Iran itself, an official holiday in Iran. It's the most important festival in the year for Iran. And if you thought Sylvester is a Jewish stretch, Nowruz is even more of a stretch for Iranians, because Nowruz means new day in Persian. It's a carryover from the Zoroastrian tradition. Before Islam, the main tradition in the area was Zoroastrianism. The first followers of Zarathustra were from the area of Persia, and they've been worshipping there since about 1200 before the Common Era. It's the late Bronze, early Iron Age. Nowruz is certainly stuck around. And even though Muslim leadership in Iran has turned Zoroastrianism into a persecuted minority and believe that Zoroastrian tradition is considered heresy, Nowruz is still honored. And it doesn't start January 1st. It's actually in March at the vernal equinox. Jewish life and Israeli life have been influenced by the dominant culture in which Jews lived. Russian culture influenced Russian Jews. American culture influenced American Jews. Those cultures were brought to Israel. As much as our communities may sometimes feel like a ghetto or a shtetl, they're not. For better or for worse, non-Jewish culture encroaches upon us. The responsible and mature response is to teach our children that, while these traditions are nice, they're not ours. That not embracing those traditions is another way we have to show the world that we are unique and different and proud to be Jewish. Simple as that. I've also been thinking about, as I often do, about the United States and Israel and Iran. The United States and Israel are allies. They are in diplomatic and military sync on most issues. But there is one big divide between them, a wedge that is driving them apart. Not surprisingly, that wedge is Iran. The United States has denied an Israeli request to fast-track 2 refueling planes. That's more significant than at first it appears. Most things go well between the United States and Israel. But almost a year ago, the United States approved the sale to Israel of 8 K-46 refueling planes at a total of $2.4 billion. The planes are scheduled to be delivered 2024. It is the first time the United States has even permitted the sale of the refueling planes to anyone. Changing delivery dates by advancing timetables happens all the time on these things. The term that describes the process is actually called flipping the tail. The supplier simply switches one delivery for another. In this case, the United States, aka the supplier, has said that they cannot flip the tail because they were not given enough time to make the change. Israel, however, claims that they gave the United States plenty of time, and the United States is making excuses not to provide those K-46 planes. Actually, Israel has said that they sent the request not once, not twice, but 3 times. Israel's current fleet of refueling planes was grounded this year for a little bit. We do not know how many planes are in Israel's fleet. We do know that the planes are old, 60 years old. The planes are called Rams, and they're repurposed Boeing 707s. The early arrival of 2 K-46 refueling planes is not a frivolous request. Those 2 planes would make it much easier for Israel to conduct a strike against Iran's nuclear facilities and defense systems. It's so obvious. It's a strike we know is in the works and coming. The United States knows why Israel is requesting the planes, so why reject the proposal? Why not make it easier for Israel to strike Iran? The simple answer is that despite what we are told, the United States might not want Israel to attack Iran alone. Note, not that the United States does not want Israel to attack Iran. Rather, the United States does not want Israel to attack Iran alone, on its own, without the participation of the United States. Israel understands that the United States is looking at the situation from a broader perspective, a more global perspective than Israel's perspective. But the United States needs to see the Israeli perspective as well. The United States needs to realize that Israel cannot be an effective threat against Iran. And it's actually important that the mere threat could prevent Iran from achieving its nuclear goals. It's the viable threat, even more than an actual attack. That might give Iran pause. When it comes to Iran, Israel is the perfect proverbial hair trigger. A hair trigger is so sensitive that at any moment and in this instance Israel, could be released. At any moment, Israel could strike out and hit targeted Iranian nuclear facilities and Iran's missile defense systems at any moment. If, or more probably when, Iran reaches the point of no return, Israel will have to strike. And that strike, United States assistance would be very helpful. Helpful in terms of technical and logistical assistance. Helpful in terms of intelligence and communications assistance. Helpful in terms of weapons, armaments, and supplies. Those in the know in Washington are pushing for the United States to provide Israel with THAAD, which are thermal high altitude air defenses, It's a rocket battery and security to supplement Israel's arrow system. If Iran were to counterstrike and attack Israel, these defense weapons would be essential. Israel will also need more bunker buster bombs. These are heavy munitions, and they are necessary to break through the deep, secure bunkers that house the Iranian nuclear program. Most importantly, if the United States were to help Israel in an attack against Iran, their presence would lend international legitimacy to the operation. It would signify to the world that stopping Iran is not just an Israeli issue, that stopping Iran's nuclear program will make the world safer. In October, Israel hosted an Air Force exercise. The purpose was to invite countries who might help in an attack against Iran, either publicly or behind the scenes. The air forces of the United States, Germany, Britain, France, Italy, Greece, India, all came to Israel. The United Arab Emirates sent an Air Force commander. The Jordanian Air Force participated unofficially. And just before these exercises, the U.S. Fifth Fleet trained with Israel. Bottom line, the United States is conflicted. The United States knows that Iran's nuclear objectives must be stopped, and stopped soon. The United States has not yet figured out how much skin they want to put in the game, how involved and how openly involved they want to be, how much to help Israel, and how much to hold back. Will Israel have to save the world from a nuclear attack all on its own? I don't know. We'll see. Coming up next, Points of View. First up is a column from the Jerusalem Post. It was published on December 14th, 2021. The column is actually entitled, "The Peres Doctrine Against Iran is Still Relevant. Opinion." Subtitled, "Shimon Peres reiterated his approach that Iran's nuclear aspirations are not purely an Israeli problem, but a global problem." It's written by Yoram Dori. This is how Dori begins. In 2001, I served as Shimon Peres' close advisor when he was foreign minister in Ariel Sharon's government. In this position, I accompanied him to the vast majority of diplomatic meetings he had with the heads of state and foreign ministers in Israel and around the world. Dori now explains that the Peres doctrine is very simple and very typical of Peres' thought process. It's practical, Dori writes. The doctrine of Peres of 20 years ago was true then and is true even today, and was based on several basic principles. Before his diplomatic interlocutors, Peres reiterated his approach that Iran's nuclear aspirations are not purely an Israeli problem, but a global problem. More than once in the conversation, in one capital city or another, Peres presented his colleagues the geographical distance from Tehran to that capital, while at the same time revealing the launch ranges of the missiles that Iran is developing and acquiring, missiles that can carry nuclear warheads and hit the heart of that capital. Peres' approach, which has been repeatedly stated, was that it is difficult to stop Iran's ability to reach a nuclear threshold because knowledge cannot be stopped. But he demanded that the international community focus on launching capabilities and of preventing Iran from building an arsenal of nuclear-capable missiles that could reach anywhere in the world, to Tel Aviv, to Washington, to Moscow. Now Dori concludes, and he tells us, don't reinvent the wheel. Follow Peres' model. The same view of 20 years ago, he says, which was based on a complete coordination with the United States while maintaining the principle that Israel has the right to protect the lives of its citizens, is correct, and perhaps even more so today. The American security and diplomatic umbrella is a necessary condition for the denial of nuclear weapons from Iran. You don't always have to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes there is a wheel that travels well. You just have to keep it from getting a puncture. That's a flat tire in Hebrew. This column is very well timed and extremely relevant for today. Next up is a column by Ron Ben-Ishai, and it was published in Ynet, also on December 14, 2021. It's entitled, "By Striking Syria's Chemical Sites, Israel Sent a Message to All Those Who Wish It Ill," and it's subtitled Analysis. Despite international reassurances regarding Assad's chemical weapons program, Jerusalem chose not to stand aside and take action. A direct threat not only to the Syrian dictator, but also to his allies in Iran. Ron Ben-Ishai is the clearest thinking military analyst I have ever met. Even when I disagree with him, which is not very often, I am truly amazed at his depth and insight into every situation. This is how he begins. The report by the Washington Post on Monday regarding 2 alleged Israeli attacks made in the past year on chemical weapons sites in Syria did not come in a vacuum. Israel was alleged to have attacked Syrian chemical plants as early as 2018, sending the message that Damascus is continuing to develop non-conventional weapons. The threat of such weapons being developed by the Assad regime was thought to have been lifted in 2014 when the UN Security Council's WMD watchdog announced that the removal of near 95% of Syria's chemical weapons material was complete. I need to point out here that Assad has used gas in the past, mostly sarin gas. And this is a real worry for Israel's intel, because they're suggesting that he is again working to develop WMD. Ben Ishai continues here. Israel had repeatedly declared that it would use force if necessary to prevent WMD from the Assad regime, fearing such weapons might reach the Lebanon-based Hezbollah terror group, which would then be able to use them against Israelis. The Le Monde report makes clear that the 3 chemical sites named as targets of Israel's attack in Washington Post article were not the only sites on Israel's radar, and that the latest strike, a large cache of nerve gas, and another with chlorine gas were destroyed. Ben Ishai concludes his column, stressing how important it is to Israel that they not permit Syria from acquiring WMD. The July attack that was reported in the Post was clearly one of the most important moves Israel has made clandestinely to interfere in the Assad regime's ability to produce WMD. The publication on Monday, quoting intelligence sources, was meant to indicate to Assad, as well as to Iran, that Israel was determined to prevent their non-conventional capability, be it by chemical or nuclear weapons. This is an excellent column. We spend so much time talking about Iran. We have neglected, and often we do neglect, Syria's dangerous and threatening aspirations. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 4 cartoons and memes today. They're all just funny. The first is about spelling, specifically the spelling of the word Wednesday. A man says we should stop being dumb about this and just agree to spell Wednesday Wednesday. That's funny. Next up is a sign as you approach the famous Mount Rushmore, the site where the presidents are sculpted into the cliff face. The sign reads, "Before Mount Rushmore was carved, its beauty was unprecedented." The pun here is on president, spelled president like a president of the United States, and precedent spelled as with a C and an E. It was very funny. The next cartoon was removed from the Fox News website because of pressure, especially pressure from the ADL. They said that it was anti-Semitic. The cartoon was drawn by A.F. Bronco. You decide whether it is. I'll lay it out for you and try to explain where the dimensions are and what the tensions are. But you decide on this. The cartoon has donkeys, 2 donkeys, dressed in suits representing the Democratic DAs and AGs, Attorney Generals. The legend reads, "Defund police plus no bail equals lawlessness and chaos." The AG and the DA are donkeys, puppets, and the puppeteer is George Soros. The S that's spelled Soros is made of dollar signs. I understand why the ADL thinks that this lampooning Soros is anti-Semitic, especially because the S is in the dollar signs. But in defense of the cartoon, it is supposed to lampoon, and Soros did bankroll the DAs and the AGs. You decide. The last cartoon is aimed at all of us. A tidal wave is chasing us, and it's called COVID, and it's filled with disease as well as with knives that can kill us. The cartoon is pretty straightforward. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Drones have become a weapon of choice for Iran and Hezbollah. 2 drones recently entered the area around a base in Syria located near Tanf, where U.S. forces are still in place. Tanf is just inside Syria, very close to the Iraqi-Jordanian border. The base has been attacked in the past by drones, and they are almost certainly Iranian drones. As the 2 drones entered the area close to the camp, not in the camp, close to the camp, one was shot down and the other turned and escaped. U.S. Central Command confirmed the attack and response. It is unclear how many U.S. troops and advisors are on the ground there right now. Certainly, there are many fewer than were there before. But everyone in the Middle East, everyone, especially enemies of the United States, know that Tanf, and they know that U.S. troops are headquartered there. This camp is a symbol for enemies of the West, and it's the embodiment of the United States. It is a target for the enemies of the United States. Somehow, the surveillance tape from Iran's nuclear centrifuge labs is missing. I hope you're not surprised by this. The IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN watchdog group, has asked for the tapes. The Iranians say the tapes disappeared after and during an attack in June that sabotaged the facility. The IAEA has asked for the tapes again now. Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA, is not hopeful that they will get the tapes ever. Actually, he's skeptical, and that they are and were, as Iran claims, were lost at all. At the news conference, when asked about it, and if it was credible that they just vanished, Grossi said, and I'm quoting here, "We have doubts about this, is why we are asking where they are. I'm hopeful they're going to come up with an answer because it's very strange that it disappeared." There are many things that could be on those missing tapes. Iran does not want to see those things. Most importantly, what happened to the secret plans and contingency plans in the event of an attack that was happening at the time, and where the secret storages are in secret areas that might be exposed in that tape, which is why the IAEA isn't getting it. They are 40 years late, but Italy is finally investigating their role in terror attacks against Jews and Jewish sites in Italy. Internal documents show that the Italian security forces knew specific details about the 1982 attack against the Great Synagogue in Rome, during which a 2-year-old baby was murdered and 37 people were wounded. The documents that have been made public show that even though Italy's security apparatus knew about the attacks, knew who was going to do it and what was going to happen, they did not step up and protect the Great Synagogue. Much later, only one of the 5 Palestinian terrorists who perpetrated this attack was arrested, but for something else, not for that. He was arrested because he was crossing the border and entering Turkey with 33 pounds of explosives. 40 years ago, Italy decided that supporting Palestinian murderers and terrorists was more important than protecting Italian citizens and Italian historic sites. This is an embarrassment for Italy. At least now they're investigating. Israel has a simple single goal in Syria: stop Iran. Israel's entire objective is to prevent Iran from expanding their control on land, in politics and in practice. In effect, Israel wants Iran out of Syria. They want to end all Iranian influence over Syrian activities. That includes Iranian soldiers, Iranian advisors. On the ground, it includes everything. It includes major Iranian influences in markets, imports, exports, finance, everything. Israel will continue to strike and hit Iranian military in Syria. They will strike their advisors and they will hit and destroy their equipment. They will degrade them until they do not come back. That's Israel's goal. Syrians realize that Iran is putting them in Israel's crosshairs. Despite President Bashar Assad's having won the civil war that tore Syria apart, there is still neither peace nor quiet in this country. And Syrians know that most of the noise and the danger is courtesy of Iran. Israel will continue on their mission. Iran's very presence in Syria is a threat to Israel. Israel's tourism minister, Yoel Razvasov, announced that Israel will be lifting restrictions for travel. The lifting of restrictions means opening up travel for tourism to those who are fully vaccinated, Israelis and tourists visiting Israel alike. In an interview with Ynet, Tourism Minister Yoel Razvasov said, "In my opinion, within a week, we will be able to open Ben Gurion Airport because there is no point in it being closed and having all the restrictions on vaccinated Israeli citizens and the tourism industry that suffers as well." In essence, the minister was explaining that restrictions are not helping contain the spread of COVID, and the country must reach a balance between public health on the one hand and its threats and economic damage on the other. For many people, this is welcome and a long-awaited news. Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett spoke with Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla and it was agreed that Israel will purchase 100,000 doses of the newly approved Pfizer antiviral drug called Paxlovid. The FDA approved the drug through their emergency use authorization, according to an announcement released jointly by the Office of the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Health. The pill will be available at no cost to those people considered high risk. The trial tests showed that Paxlovid will be and has been extremely effective against COVID, including against the Omicron variant. It reduced death and hospitalizations by nearly 90%. Talks also are in progress for Israel to purchase large amounts of Merck's new antiviral pill, which is called Molnupiravir. The pill, too, will be given for emergency use and was approved by the FDA. Israel has suffered economically from COVID, tourism especially. It was one of the major staples of Israeli economy, and it's ground to a halt for 2 years. The government of Israel just allocated 235 million shekel, which is about $73 million, for a tourism plan to help rebuild the tourism industry. 25 million will go towards tour guides. 60 million will go towards incoming tourists. That's for PR and advertising. 150 million will go to hotels. It's not a lot of money, but it's a start. The ripple effect of the halt in tourism crosses almost every sector in Israeli society and industry. When tourism dries up, agriculture is hurt. Transportation, safety, technology, entertainment, food, hotels, restaurants, even falafel stands and pizza places feel the impact. It's important to get tourism back on track in Israel. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that I mentioned Wednesday in the cartoon section earlier? And the way it's spelled, but that was the joke, Wednesday. Why put the D in there at all? It's crazy and it's nuts. N-E-S. There is little doubt that it is unusual. The word itself is unusual. But there's a reason that odd and unusual spelling exists. The word comes from Old English and then into Middle English. The word is Wednesday or Wednesday. It was a day of tribute to an Anglo-Saxon deity named Odin. Did you hear that? Odin, Woden's day. In French and Latin, the fourth day of the week is dedicated to the god Mercury, also pagan. In French, Mercredi. In Italian and Latin, Mercredi. Of course, in Hebrew, we don't have that at all. We don't have pagan gods in our days. It's ordinal. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. And of course, the seventh day is called Shabbat. That's the only day that has a name. Shabbat, the day of rest. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.